Now, to put an exclamation point on some old business, I'm going to toe tag Glowbusters Bob. Actually, he did it and brought it on himself. And I don't see a scenario where this Glowbusters Bob and the FE Core Carnival Clown Show is going to be brought up here again. If it is brought up, my response will just be to send this toe tag and just be done with it, because I don't want to deal with it anymore. All right? So we're going to toe tag him and put the exclamation point on. So like I said, the video last night was sent to me. We're going to go over his comments. There's 2 comments. We'll get to the next one here in a few minutes. But I'm going to read through this thing a couple times so there's no mistranslation, no miscommunication. So, Bob, Glowbusters Bob, not everything has to meet the stringent requirements of, dependent variable, independent variable, observed phenomena. Yeah, that's all fine and dandy, and it's great for the most part, but let's face it, if we had to run everything through that ringer, and then whatever didn't fit through that ringer, then all of a sudden we couldn't call it science. Therefore, it didn't exist. Then this is a big problem I have with some people that are promoting that idea. Then science would never get anywhere. Just because it doesn't meet all the requirements of IV, DV, observed phenomena, all that bullshit, and then just say it doesn't exist, well, then you're an idiot, and I'm sorry for you. Ha 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 ha. So, what's been happening here for the past 3 or 4 weeks, I've been getting videos sent to me by Bob, little girl Bob, in the back channels, frequenting these shows, some of them I never heard of, and giving this same spiel or something roughly close to it, right? So I'm tired of it. And like I said, I'm going to put an exclamation point on it. I'm going to read this again. So like I said, no mistranslations, no misinterpretations. Let's listen to it again. Glowbusters Bob, not everything has to meet the stringent requirements of, dependent variable, independent variable, observed phenomena. Yeah, that's all fine and dandy, and it's great for the most part. But let's face it, if we had to run everything through that ringer, and then whatever didn't fit through that ringer, then all of a sudden we couldn't call it science. Therefore, it didn't exist. Then this is a big problem I have with some people that are promoting that idea. Then science would never get anywhere. Just because it doesn't meet all the requirements of IV, DV, observed phenomena, all that bullshit, and then just say it doesn't exist, well, then you're an idiot, and I'm sorry for you. Ha 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 ha. So, obviously, some people, right? We all know who these some people are. And this is confusing to me. Yeah, that's all fine and dandy, and it's great for the most part, talking about observed phenomena, dependent and independent variables. But then, almost in the very next breath, he calls the IV, DV, and observed phenomena all that bullshit. So, what is it, Bob? Is it bullshit? Or is it fine and dandy and it's great? Right? You ever heard of contradictions before? This is a slap in the face one. Let's get to the meat of this. Number 1, everything that's actual science, Bob, must have a dependent variable, i.e. observed natural phenomena, and an independent variable. It's called a scientific hypothesis, Bob, which leads to an experiment, Bob, from the University of Rochester Physics Labs. The scientific method distinguishes science from other forms of explanation because of its requirement of systematic experimentation. So I don't know, Bob, from what this is saying right here, you need experiment to be science. It distinguishes science from everything else, from badminton, from chicken soup, from economics. We need experimentation. Let's get another few other thoughts on the matter from subject matter experts. From Luar's Introduction to the Theory and the Application of Molecular and Quantum Mechanics, the final arbiter of truth in science is experiment. From Professor Shankar, chair of physics at Yale. The only way things change in physics is experiments. Everything is based on experiment. That's the only way we change our mind. From Richard Feynman, if it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. And that simple statement is the key to science. From Max Planck, experiment is the only means of knowledge at our disposal. Everything else is poetry, imagination. So, what constitutes a scientific experiment? From Penn State, Bob, there should be 3 categories of variables in every experiment: dependent, independent, and controlled. The dependent variable, the effect, the result, or the prediction. The independent variable, the cause, that which is varied or manipulated by the scientist to produce the effect. And controlled variables, variables that are held constant so as not to confound the test. Funny, they didn't call it bullshit here like you did. It's interesting. From explorable.com, experiment. There are 3 important variables you have to remember when you are designing your experiment: the independent variable, the dependent variable, and control variables. Again, no bullshit here. From Anne-Marie Helmenstein, PhD Biomedical Sciences from ThoughtCo. When you design an experiment, you are controlling and measuring variables. There are 3 types of variables: control variables, independent and dependent variables. We're getting a repeating refrain here, aren't we? And we still haven't seen bullshit just yet. Let's go further. So, from the Institute of Physics, Bob, when planning an investigation, students need to identify the variables that they consider significant and then select the ones they want to look at for cause and effect. If possible, any other variables that will affect the outcome of the experiment need to be kept constant during the investigation. These variables are the independent variable, dependent variable, and control variables. Shocking, I know. From GCSE Chemistry, what are the 3 main variables within a scientific experiment? The independent variable, the dependent variable, the control variables. From the National Science Teachers Association, Bob, when it comes to conducting a scientific experiment, there are 3 components that are very important. They are variables, constants, and controls. Let's take a look at each. Variables, these are the aspects of the experiment that change. There are 2 types of variables, dependent and independent. So, dependent variables, these are the variables that will change as a result of your tests. You will not be changing these, but you will be keeping track of them, as they will oftentimes indicate the results you are looking for. Independent variables, these are the variables that you will change in your experiment. You should try to have only 1 independent variable at a time in your tests, so you know for certain that the results you are seeing are caused by the 1 change you made. Constants, these are conditions that will remain the same during your experiment. And it's important to note what stayed the same in your experiment so you know that the results you are seeing are not caused by these factors. From the University of North Carolina, in an experiment, the independent variable, not the bullshit variable, the independent variable is the variable that is varied or manipulated by the researcher. And the dependent variable is the response that is measured. An independent variable is the presumed cause, whereas the dependent variable is the presumed effect. The IV is the antecedent, whereas the DV is the consequent. Let's go to Wiki, to the Ball-Tard's alma mater. An experiment is a procedure carried out to support, refute, or validate a hypothesis. Experiments provide insight into cause and effect by demonstrating what outcome occurs when a particular factor is manipulated. Take a wild friggin' guess what that particular factor being manipulated is, Bob. You're the idiot, Bob. And yes, you are sorry, you friggin' ass clown. Number two, not everything has to run through the scientific method, Bob. Only natural cause and effect relationships. Number three, clumsy which straw man fallacy, Bob. Nobody says that anything that hasn't gone through the scientific method doesn't exist. You just made that shit up. Number four, reification fallacy, Bob. Science doesn't go places, get somewhere. It's an inanimate method. Okay? In conclusion, you're a self-demonstrated scientific illiterate. See pretender clown. And it's you and only you that sailed the coffin shut, Bob. It's just you, no one else. Thanks for that. And the second comment, and we'll finish up with this. So, Bob from Globebusters. It's no wonder why a lot of Globers come in and say, well, flat earthers are scientifically illiterate. What a coincidence. And they're completely stupid because they have no idea even what they're arguing. Because again, they have this tendency to want to throw everything out just because it came from the mainstream. I got news for you. It's not all wrong. Yeah, 99% of everything we were probably always taught, no doubt about it, was lies. Believe me, I've researched conspiracies for long enough to know that they haven't. You know, pretty much the mainstream says one thing, the opposite is probably actually true. So, Bob, the Globers say that because, like you, they wouldn't know the difference between actual science and popcorn shrimp, their ass, or a pipe wrench. That's why they're saying it. And you love it too, don't you? Yeah, you know why? Because you're now a confirmed terrorist sympathizer, Bob. This thing has been going through flat earth now like a plague, right? I predicted it about 6 months ago. I said, we got to root these things out. They're dug in like an Alabama tick. They're just not saying too much. They're saying a lot now. Number three, stereotype fallacy, flat earthers and they. And just to let you know, I don't throw everything out. I don't know where you got that from. You're just making shit up again. Number four, you switched from science, or better said, what you think it is, to conspiracies. That's a non sequitur fallacy, Holmes. Number five, Globers come in, right? Come in where, Bob? Certainly never on your show. And number six, so it's not all wrong, Bob? Just 99%? And can you tell me, pray tell, what's it? But I want to know. Again and finally, let's just finish this up. It is you and only you that sailed the coffin shut, Bob. Thanks again. Like I said, this is it for my comments to Bob. Unless he wants to come in here and talk to me, I'm not dealing with this back and forth nonsense, right? Unless it's a one-on-one. Other than that, we're just gonna toe tag you with this part, and I'll just send anyone that has any questions or they bring this topic up. I'm just gonna post the toe tag and be done with it. Okay? That's it. Let's stop right there for now.
Shout out to Chow Young Cat. Says the new sheep screensaver is awesome, much better than the pouring bottle. Thank you very much for the super chat, Chow Young Cat. I've got nothing to add. Paula?
Mainly only just to emphasize why it is that the scientific method is a method and why it's needed, because in my electronics studies, one thing you're expected to be able to do is troubleshoot. And troubleshooting means that you must only have one variable, that you're going to manipulate, because you're trying to narrow down a cause of a problem. And to narrow down that cause, if you change two things at a time, it may be one of those things and you're wasting your time. You have to isolate one thing you're changing from everything else. And when you determine that that's not the problem, then you go on to another variable, one at a time. And that's why the scientific method is necessary. When you're applying it to science or engineering, you have to use the scientific method, because you have to isolate things, which is, of course, not to say that everything that is not done scientifically is not true. That's a philosophical argument. Whether something is true or real is more in the realm of conclusions that we draw from scientific experiments or observations, and not to be mistaken as the same thing or that they're interchangeable. One depends on the other. And so this method is very important because you couldn't do even engineering without it. So you use science and engineering. There's a reason you have that method, the scientific method, because you have to isolate things. And that's what it's all about. So when you say that you changed something, that some action you did in an experiment is a cause, you're not saying that, for example, you raise the density of something, that somehow it's, coming from you personally. It's that you as the experimenter varied something, and the variation is the thing you did. Why that variation happens is another experiment. And that's the point that I can't, I think that the two sides are talking past each other, partly, there's a lot of other things, but that one especially, because you have to isolate one thing at a time, and they're trying to bring in two or more things when they say, well, just because you added salt to the water doesn't mean that's the cause. Well, technically, yes, it is the cause. You did something. That's how scientific experiments work. And then later you can find out, why is it that adding salt to the water increases the density? But the fact is, as a method, you did something. That's the cause. And it's a simple point, but it's a really tough one to get across for some reason.
Wholeheartedly agree. And the big problem is, and this has been the problem from the beginning, people are using the term science without any cowbell. They're just using that term without anything behind it. To be science, you have to do systematic experimentation. That's it. If you don't do it, it's not science, period. It's the end of the story. So I don't know what they're going to do. Anyone that says science, you know what I'm going to do. So I don't know.
Yep, because words matter.
Yes, they do.